Okay, welcome back, dear viewers. Uh, Today we're going to continue our deep dive into Alien RPG. I'm going to focus on combat and damage today. I'm actually splitting this section up into two videos. The next video will be focusing on stress and panic, as well as other conditions and things that can happen. If I put them together, I would have a very long video, and I don't want to do that. I prefer to keep these kind of short. Some people like to listen to 2 hours. I don't. Um, Before we get into this, though, two things. One, I'm changing the format on the presentation of Alien RPG. I was looking at my prior video, the first video, and boy, was that busy. I hope I didn't blind anybody with that awfully busy PowerPoint. So I'm going to try to, hopefully, this will be easier to read. I'm going to try to make it easier to read for you. The second thing is, if you're new to my videos, aside from them being pretty lo-fi, what I do is I play games. I try to record myself playing these games, so you can see me using them, and then I talk about them. Nothing against the flip through review, but it's been my experience that sometimes when you read an RPG that looks cool and is fun to read, it's not as fun when you actually end up playing it. So I don't get a whole lot out of flip through reviews. I know the hobby can be costly. So hopefully you get something out of these, such that you are spending your hard-earned dollars where it's best to be spent, right? So let's get started. Let me get my background music. Alien background music. Get us in the mood. Combat and damage. All right. So, as with any RPG, temporal spatial relationships are important. And Alien sort of separates itself from the standard concepts of feet or meters moved per round, and uses something called zones. And this is pretty standard for any of Free League's games that are utilizing the Year Zero game engine. Zones are kind of abstract, while the game does give you some recommendations for its size. It can be whatever the GM feels is necessary, which I like. I do think that's good, because it's these games are going for more cinematic feel as opposed to a more atomistic, you know, crunchy, March of War type game that the classic Dungeons and Dragons is. So yeah, zone could be a room, a corridor, a back alley, a stretch of road. Um, it could be, yeah, whatever the encounter calls for, or however the game master designs the map. A zone can be open or blocked depending on whether there's a wall or a building or something. So that's pretty straightforward. But everything is going to be measured by zones rather than feet or meters or anything like that. As far as time is concerned, not a whole lot new here. Rounds and turns. This should be familiar to those who are playing Dungeons and Dragons. But this game also introduces the shift, and there's modifications of this concept in Free League's other games. Like Forbidden Lands has quarter days. Okay, as opposed to calling a shift. Using a shift in Alien implies you're working on a spacecraft or on a space station, and you have a shift. You're working your 8-hour shift or something. So I like the fact that they called it that. It kind of helps with the immersion a bit, right? But it denotes a period of time that your action is going to take uh, to whether to do whatever. And this game breaks it down, and rounds are typically used in combat. Turns is during the stealth mode of the game, which we'll get into, and shifts is usually dealing in recovery. So as you can see right there, that even though you have these time measurements that seem to make sense abstractly in terms of our everyday lives, they're actually really tied towards the action of the game, which is trying not to get killed by a xenomorph. Okay. Um, what I also like too, probably going back to zones, is that it's purposefully abstract to allow the game master to kind of do what the game master needs to do to describe the zone and describe how much time has passed. for that cinematic feel that this game is ultimately going to. And just as a quick aside, I will be doing a video on cinematic play versus campaign play because I have a lot to say about that. Um, but anyway, so zones can be cluttered, where moving through it, you got to make a mobility check roll, and if you fail, you fall and you're knocked prone, and that might actually cause some noise, right? If it's dark, your observation rolls and ranged attacks are at -2 dice to the dice pool. And if it's a cramped space, like you're moving through some ducts or pipes or whatever, um, similar to what Bishop did in the Aliens movie, which when he started crawling through that tube that they sealed him in, he can only crawl in that cramped space. Um, and then there's range categories that are connected to the concept of zones. And this one does take a little getting used to, at least for me it did. Short range combat is actually still in the same zone. So don't think of a zone as a 5-foot square on a map. Okay? It's going to be something a little bigger. It could be a 5-foot square. Um, it could be, but more than likely it's going to be something a little bigger. So the room in your house, like your living room, could be a zone and probably should be considered a zone. And if you're fighting someone, over the controller to the television, that you're in engaged range, and then the person on the other side of the room telling you to quit fighting, they're in short range, but they're still in that zone, right? And then medium is the next zone over, maybe the hallway, your hallway connected to your living room. Long is up to 4 zones away. And then extreme is up to a kilometer. That's really reserved, I think, for outside. But that's the zones, and that's very abstract, and it's really, really, really about designing the encounter for a cinematic sort of experience. Stealth mode. So this is what's happening pretty much most of the game. I think, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I think recovery is something that's sort of done near the end of your game session or in between game session, where players are sort of doing some downtime stuff and healing and whatnot. But most of the game is going to be this stealth mode. For players of old school D&D, this is your exploration pillar. This is where your party, the players are moving through the map, looking at things, exploring this, that, and the other. But they call it stealth mode because, again, you're most likely being hunted by a xenomorph, so you got to be quiet. And an action will require you to basically spend the entire turn doing it, with some GM discretion. And you really can't move out of the zone. So if you're trying to access a terminal for whatever reason, you're in that zone for about 10 minutes. Okay, and you have to make your ComTech roll, or if that's what is required, right? And players can move 2 zones per turn. The enemy movement is tracked obviously by the game master behind his screen, because you don't want the players to know what's going on. But NPCs will be using the same rules, but xenomorphs and other critters will have their own movement rates. What I really like here is there's 2 types of enemies that you can be dealing with, passive and active. And I think this is a cool distinction to make. So the passive enemies are the ones that just don't know the players are there, and they can be ambushed. Okay, active enemies are aware of the PCs and are actually stalking the PCs. They're looking for them. So I was thinking about Metal Gear Solid. If you ever played that video game, I'm not a huge fan, but it's got some neat stuff in it. But this makes me think of that game. So like if you're trying to sneak up on some guy who hasn't seen you yet, that's passive. But moment he sees you, he's gonna come after you. Okay. Detection during stealth mode is pretty straightforward. You're making a mobility versus observation. There is a chart that will modify these rolls based on the distance you have. So like sneaking by someone in the living room, your short range zone, it's going to be a lot harder than sneaking by that same person when you're down the hall in the next zone over. Okay. I also like this rule too. Active enemies that choose to remain hidden and does not attack cannot be spotted. So there is no observation rule here. Okay, if you're running this game and a xenomorph is hiding in the air ducts above, in the zone that the players are in, don't have them roll an observation check to see if they know he's the xenomorph's there. They're not supposed to. They're not supposed to know he's there, unless they have a motion tracker, which even that has some limitations. Um, what I like about the rules for the motion tracker too is that every time you use it, got to make a power supply roll, and if that power runs out, no more motion tracker, right? Um, and it only detects moving objects. So that alien that's up in the air duct, that's just not moving and waiting, you're not. The players are still not going to detect um, the alien. Now, arguably, maybe you've decided the xenomorph is a passive enemy hiding in the air duct. I don't know why you would say that, but let's say you did. Then I think it would be possible to observe because presumably the passive xenomorph is shifting its weight, maybe munching on something, doing something to get the player's attention. But if it's active and it's hiding, preparing its own ambush, the players really cannot see it, and I love that. I think it really adds the tension of the game, and why a motion tracker isn't going to be a silver bullet. So, um, okay. Actions and initiatives. Okay, so I'm real quick gripe. I don't understand why people are designing games that include both dice and cards. I don't know. Maybe it's a Magic the Gathering thing. I'm not a big fan of Magic the Gathering or any card game. Um, but this alien uses cards to draw initiative, and that's the only reason why you use these cards. They have, of course, their own cards that you can purchase, or you can just use a deck of cards, numbers 1 through 10. Um, I see why it's important because no one will go at the same time. Everyone has, numbers 1 through 10. You will never have people acting in the same initiative turn. Okay, you draw once, and that's the order for the rest of the combat. No matter how many rounds it takes. NPCs are typically split into groups, and they all act as a group. It is possible to change the initiative with players, kind of working together. There's also feats and stunts that you can do that can change initiative. Um, every round, a player has a slow and fast action, or they can sacrifice a slow action for another fast. But you cannot sacrifice a fast action and get a slow action. Okay. Slow actions typically require a skill roll. Those types of actions, while fast actions rarely require a skill roll. So, good example is combat starts. Let's say you're talking to a terrified uh, roughneck in a space station that's being overrun by aliens. The roughneck has completely lost his or her mind. They have a gun. You're trying to talk them down. It doesn't work, and boom, you're about to engage in combat. So on your turn, as a fast action, you pull your pistol, and then as a slow action, you fire. Okay, that's kind of how that works. Um, Marking your actions, 90-degree turn of your card. Again, it's just the card game aspect that drives me nuts. There's got to be a better way to do initiative. Maybe I'll think of something and play test it. I don't know. When you help others, though, and this is important. I mentioned this in the last video. You can help others by adding a die to the roll. Okay, but when you help others, you got to announce it before the dice is rolled because you only get one shot. It's one die roll per action, make or break. Okay, so this rule is very important. Don't let your players, roll their skill and fail, and then have their buddies say, "Oh, could I have helped him?" It's like, well, yeah, you could have, but you didn't say it, so you didn't. Um, Movement. I like this. Running is a fast action, so you can move one zone to the next, and if you want to move two zones, you got to sacrifice your slow action. Crawling is a slow action, um, so if you ever get knocked prone, you're in trouble. Moving out of close combat, you have to announce a retreat, and we'll be covering that soon. Doors and hatches. Okay, so if it's unlocked, it's a fast action to open it. However, if it's locked and you want to use a Comtech roll to sort of unlock the code, assuming it's closed via a computer panel, that would require a slow action. I would argue as you type in the code to unlock it. If it was something that was hacked and you needed to hack it, or if it's a hatch that is just closed and no one can do the Comtech roll, I would allow for like a heavy machinery roll to like jury rig it open, but that would take a full turn. So that's how I would rule something like that. Okay, so um, sneak attack and ambush is this sort of like meat and potatoes of some of the sneaking around bits of this section of the game. Sneak attack is individual against individual. Ambush is for groups. Um, Both use the mobility versus observation opposed roll, and they're again both rolls are modified by the distance of the opponents. Um, Ambush, because you're not moving, you get a +2 to the mobility roll. That also applies to xenomorphs hiding in air ducts. Just saying. Okay. Um, and if you're successful, you get a free action, slow or fast, but not both. And the attack cannot be blocked. Um, so yeah, that's the only chance the players have of witnessing or knowing that xenomorph is there up in the air ducts that's active and trying to hide is at this moment when it jumps out to get somebody. They better roll a really high observation roll because I can guarantee you the xenomorphs, and I'll do a video on them because there's a bunch in this game. Um, it's actually quite cool. They give like an entire ecology. Um, their mobility rolls or skills are pretty high. So, all right, and here's just some the charts for the difference between a slow and fast action. You'll be referring to this quite a bit while you're playing the game and learning it. All right, close combat. Okay, only works in engaged ranged. Okay, obviously you got to use a close combat skill. Drawing a weapon to use in close combat is a fast action, so pulling a knife. If you are prone, you cannot attack. You must first stand up, and that is a fast action. If someone attacks you while you're prone, like they go before you, they get a +2 to their roll. The way combat is resolved, just like any skill check, you just need to roll 1/6 to be successful. In which case you do the weapon damage. I think a knife is 2, a fist is 1, and that will be mitigated by armor, if any, and we'll cover that soon. For every 6 you roll, though, beyond the first, you achieve a stun. And this is sort of you, the player, momentarily taking over the narration and explain what you're going to do. You can do additional point of damage, and you can pick this multiple times, so you could like knock someone out in one punch if you want, right? Um, you can choose to outmaneuver the enemy and exchange initiative with them. You can knock or pull a weapon or object from their opponent, so you don't disarm them. You can knock someone down, make them fall prone, or you can just pin the enemy and start a grapple. And again, so if you roll 4 6s and you're fist fighting with someone, you could say you're going to do 2 damage to them and knock the gun out of their hand with the third one, and then pin them to the ground. You could do something like that. That would be like this really amazing thing you did uh, with respect to this combat, right? Using that example of the terrified roughneck. You punch him in the face, knock his weapon out, and then grapple him. Blocking. This is where combat gets a little bit more complicated. blocking. It's considered a fast action, and you have to roll your close combat skill. But it's a reactive action, so that counts against your 2 available actions. So if you've already used your slow and fast action, you can't block. Okay, so might be a good idea to hold on to a fast action just in case. It all depends on what's going on. If you are unarmed, you can only block unarmed attacks. So if someone's coming at you with a knife, you're not blocking it. Okay. What I like about this though is for every 6 you roll, you can decrease the damage by 1, or you can do a counterattack that does weapon damage, but this damage cannot be increased. Okay. Or you can disarm your opponent. So you could really have a dynamic combat going on between 2 opponents that are, locked in close combat. I highlighted this because this is kind of important. So the players are still sort of like, the heroes of the story. NPCs typically don't block unless it's dramatically appropriate. Okay, so people who don't like story gaming and don't like this level of discretion, I guess you could always have them block if you want. But I actually like this rule because it keeps combat flowing. NPCs are going down, and then you can move on to the next thing. Grappling. When you grapple someone, both you and your opponent fall to the ground, so you're both knocked prone. Your opponent drops any weapon and cannot move, and the only thing that your opponent can do is try to break free, which is a slow action. So he has to wait for his or her turn. What you can do is either release the opponent or make a grapple attack, which cannot be blocked, and that is a normal unarmed attack, but it's done as a fast action, and you do all the damage that you want to do as you like choke somebody out or something. In order to retreat from engaged range, you must make a mobility roll to move to short range. If you fail, you still move, but the enemy gets a free close combat attack that cannot be blocked. Okay. Shoving, I like this rule here in particular. It's a fast action, and you can shove an opponent at engaged range away from you. With a successful close combat roll, the opponent is shoved to short range, and the shoves can be blocked. So, hypothetically, if you have your pistol out and some crazed cultist surprises you, right, and starts punching you in the face, and you're in engaged combat, and we'll cover this in a minute, but there's penalties to shooting someone in engaged range. You can use your fast action to push them out of the way. Now they're short distance, and then you can use your slow action to shoot them. Okay, ranged combat. Okay, generally you got to use the ranged combat skill. This also includes thrown objects. So if you're going to throw, I don't know, a computer monitor at a xenomorph that's coming at you out of desperation, you got to use your ranged combat skill for that. Drawing a gun or a rifle is a fast action. Firing is a slow action. You can use a fast action to aim if your gun is already out, and that gives you a +2 to your ranged attack roll. However, if you get interrupted by doing something else, getting attacked, you lose this bonus. Ranged penalties will apply, and like I mentioned before, engaged range, someone trying to attack you in close combat, you're going to have a -3 to your ranged attack roll as you're trying to shoot them. And then, of course, target size will affect your roll as well. Resolution is very similar to close combat. For every 6 you roll, beyond the first, you can do more damage. You can pin the enemy, and this is where actually ranged combat can get really interesting and fun. You can pin down the enemy. If it's a player character, they have to make an immediate panic check, which we'll cover in the next video. But that's really important if you're a game master and you roll real well with like a cultist opening up on your players, especially if you know they have a lot of stress already. NPCs simply lose their next slow action, so this is great. That's some great news for the players who just want to keep the cultists or whoever from attacking them. You can position yourself and exchange your initiative with the enemy. You can shoot a weapon or object out of someone's hand. or you can have your opponent fall to the ground or pushed back by the force of the attack. So maybe you do really well against the xenomorph, and you want to have your shotgun blast push the xenomorph into an airlock. There you go. Okay. Auto fire rules are really cool. Some weapons can do this, not all, obviously. You get a +2 to your ranged combat skill. So if you're a Marine with ranged combat of 3, and agility of 4, and you're going to open up with your pulse rifle, you're rolling 9 dice. And that's not including any, stress dice you might already have, and any bonuses you might have from ranged. I mean, you're opening up. You could be rolling like a huge pool of dice. However, your stress level increases immediately. There are some talents that will negate this, but the act of opening up with full auto is a stressful event. So your stress level immediately increases. So that Marine who opened up with his 9 dice is actually rolling 10. One of them is a stress die, so he could panic. For every 6 you roll above the first, you can assign damage to a secondary target, and that secondary target takes the full weapon damage, not just one extra point of damage. And then for every 6 beyond that, you can apply a stunt to that secondary target. So if you are opening up on 2 cultists and you want them to be pinned, you will need to roll 4 6s. 2 to hit each of them, and then 2 more to apply the stunt. So you can see how this game can become kind of tactical. And if you roll, let's say you roll that 10 dice, 9 plus the stress die, so total of 10, and you only got 2 successes. I've seen it happen. Okay, I've actually seen people miss, but you can only get 2 successes. Well, you can always push the roll, right, to try to re-roll and get those extra 2 successes and really pin these cultists down, right? But pushing the roll causes stress, so now you're rolling 11 dice. Okay, and you got 2 stress, So anyway, things to think about while you're playing the game. Ammo. This is an interesting rule, and I like it. Okay, you really don't track ammo. I mean, you track reloads, but you don't. You're not counting arrows. You're not counting crossbow bolts, right? It's more like just keeping track. Do I have a full quiver or not? Think of it like that. So the only time you track ammo is, or need to reload, is when you roll a 1 or more on your stress dice. So let's take our hapless soldier there, and let's say he does get the 4 successes against the 2 cultists, right? But he also rolled a 1 on that stress die. Okay, he would have to make a panic check, and more than likely he's going to succeed. He doesn't freak out or anything, so his attack is still successful. All right, but he rolled a 1, so now he's got to reload. Okay, and so that is going to be a slow action. What's really cool is synthetics never run the risk of running out of ammo because they're controlled. They're not emotional like humans. Of course, for dramatic purposes, the GM can override that. Cover is a fast action. Taking cover is a fast action, and it acts like armor. So there's an armor rating to the cover you're using. So like shrubbery is a 2. Bulkhead, inner bulkhead of a ship is a 5, for example. And when you're hit by a ranged attack, you roll your base dice equal to the armor rating, and for every 6 you have, you reduce the damage by 1. I think it better understood that you reduce the successes by 1. So if someone rolls 3 successes while they're shooting at you, and you get down 2, I would argue that the person shooting at you doesn't get a stunt. They just do some damage to you. Cover and body armor stack, and NPCs never take cover unless the GM says so. Again, this is more of a dramatic, cinematic thing. That's up to you. Overwatch is another cool rule. basically, if you don't have any enemies in engaged range, you can aim in a specific direction. Basically, you announce, I'm going to aim my pulse rifle down the hallway. Okay. This is kind of like holding your action. So when somebody comes into your line of sight, you then make your attack roll. Okay. Assuming Overwatch is a fast action, shooting is a slow action. That should say action, not position. Sorry. Um, and that attack gets resolved before anything else happens that initiative turn. Okay. However, you can lose Overwatch if you do anything else, or if you get attacked in melee or take damage, like someone shoots you from across the room or something. All right, damage. You're probably already seeing how all this is sort of fitting, but your health is equal to your strength. Armor grants you that armor rating to reduce damage, and when you're no longer broken, you can recover 1 point of lost health per turn of rest. Critical injuries can still affect you after your health is restored. We're going to get into critical injuries very soon. But you are broken when your health drops to 0, okay, and you immediately roll for a critical injury. If you're not dead, you can crawl and mumble through your pain. Each further attack on you at 0 health creates another critical injury table roll. So, if someone shoots you and you have 1 health left and they do 3 points of damage to you, I would be arguing you're rolling 3 times. 1 because you were brought to 0 health, and then 2 additional times because you took all this damage. And you could die on this critical injury table, but a lot of the table is just like your arm shot out, your knee, you suffered some kind of concussion, that sort of thing. You can get healed when someone uses the medical aid skill. That is a slow action, and you get a number of health equal to the number of 6s rolled. However, it only works on people who are broken. So if you're down to 1 hit point, or health, I should say, you can't walk up to your buddy and say, "Hey, administer some medical aid, man." You can't do that. If you're on your own and no one is around to help you, you automatically recover 1 point of health after 1 turn has passed, provided you found someplace safe to hide or whatever. Broken NPCs are broken just like PCs. First aid can be administered to them, and they can administer first aid as well. However, GM can say a minor NPC is just killed, just to kind of move things along. As long as you have health left, damage points represent fatigue, bruises, or smaller cuts. Critical injuries can maim or kill you, and there's a D6-6 chart. Okay, I don't have it up here, but if you've never rolled a D6-6, it's essentially 2 6-sided dice. The first one is your tens place. The second one is the single space. So if you roll a 1 and a 6, you rolled a 16. Okay, and you'll just consult this chart. Okay, coup de grace. This is interesting. When a broken character is defenseless, and in order to kill a broken target, you must fail an empathy roll. No stress dice included there. So, but you will increase your stress level whether you're successful on this roll or not. Trying to kill a human is stressful, okay? And you have to have no empathy. So a soldier with a high empathy is not likely to, kill an unarmed opponent, whereas a scientist with low empathy, let's say, might be okay with it. I have an example of some permanent mental trauma tables here, but that's kind of what you're going to be dealing with when you get to this point. So, death. When you roll a fatal critical injury, which is possible, you have to make a stamina roll, and it cannot be pushed, and no stress is included. If you fail, you die. Okay. On a success, you linger, but you must make another death roll when the listed amount of time passes. During that time, someone could try to save your life using a medical aid roll. Interestingly, you can continue to regain your health before you fail that death roll, but you're still making that roll because of that critical injury. Okay, and you can try to do it yourself if you have some health, if you've received some health, but you have a -2 at the roll. If you're broken, 2 separate medical aid rolls will be needed. One to avoid the fatal critical injury and one to gain some health back. And then there are 4 entries that are instant kill, so there's no death roll. Healing is measured in time by shifts, days, that sort of thing. Healing time can be cut in half if someone with a medical aid roll is administering to you during this time, but you suffer the effects of the critical injury regardless of what your health is. So if you have a busted up arm and it says -1 to whatever skills, you have that until the amount of time for healing has passed. So that is it for today. Next week we'll go into panic and stress, along with all these other cool conditions that can happen, like radiation sickness and disease and oxygen loss. Um, and then I think after that I'm going to start talking about cinematic play versus campaign play. I don't know. But definitely next week, stress and panic. I also will be doing a video soon on Just a Stupid Dungeon by James Raggi, as my Lamentations of Elemental Evil crew just completed that in the actual play. I'll get to that eventually. That'll be a quick video. But anyway, that's all I got, guys. Thanks for watching. If you like this, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, bell icon, yada yada yada. Until next time.